Today for Devotions with Daniella, we are reading from the first book of Daniella, Uncultured, about growing up in the Children of God cult and going into the cult of the U.S. Army. This is Chapter 22, Us versus Them. Kandahar Airfield, Afghanistan, 2011. There's a joke in the Army. What's the difference between a slut and a bitch? A slut sleeps with everyone. A bitch sleeps with everyone but you. Hilarious. As a woman on deployment, everyone was either trying to fuck me or they were pissed at someone else for trying to fuck me. And everyone was mad at me for being caught in the middle. At least that's what I'd figured out. Not by General Order 1, the rules of behavior that governed us, but by being taunted, flirted with, or directly propositioned in dark corners by so many of even the most senior men I'd encountered in my 6 months in the desert. And there were so many dark corners. I was so tired of the jostling, of watching my back, of pretending that nobody was having sex when everyone knew everyone was having sex. Everyone that could, anyway. Despite the ridiculous rules that outlawed it in an impossible bid to make us focus harder on war, the unwritten honor code became, don't sleep with anyone on your team, don't break rank, and don't embarrass your boss with your relationship. I did the only thing I knew how to do when the loneliness and pain became unbearable. I pushed myself even harder. I drilled into work with a hyper-focus, intense even for me. After hours, I ran and ran and ran, honing my talent and hoping that I could escape my tears and my terror. I also danced, my timid steps becoming more and more sure every week. Salsa spins, merengue combinations, the slow movement of a longing bachata. Blah, blah, blah. It was hard, except on the dance floor. For 2 or 3 hours every week, I allowed myself to live, to enjoy being a 23-year-old woman at a party. That's where I met him. A contractor I asked to dance. He couldn't salsa to save his life, but he was funny and smart and gorgeous. And had been out on the sands by choice for 5 years straight with the Canadian Army deployed to Kandahar, which he'd started right after his tour with the U.S. Marines. Like me, he had no real home, and because he was a civilian, it caused no drama with my work. When I started hanging out with him after hours, I felt safe. At least that's what I told myself. But mostly it felt easy, a distraction. He didn't ask me any hard questions, and I didn't tell. Then one night, he confessed that the ex he mentioned wasn't really an ex. She was actually his girlfriend back home, where he would soon return, finally cashing out the millions he'd banked during his contractor years to move back to Colorado, buy a house, marry the girl, and enjoy the American dream. He wouldn't be back. He wished me the best and held me while I cried. I felt so alone, left behind on the interminable sands. I couldn't bear one more person falling away from my life. That night, I sobbed for hours, sitting beside him in his truck and listening to the melancholy music he played while staring at the shipping containers that dotted the landscape. I thought I loved him, or at least was falling in love with him, but it didn't matter. He was kind to me, but also firm. He had broken up with me. It was over. I don't remember why we ended up in his room, but it had to have been on purpose because getting there wasn't easy. We had to sneak into the building, past many other rooms, and slip in quietly. The Army didn't allow civilian clothes, even off-duty, and if anyone saw me in my uniform, I could be reported and my career could be over. As a woman, I stood out everywhere I went, everyone watching to see where I might be headed in the dark. In his room, we talked all night long. Like I did all the time for laughs, I begged him to leave his giant bag of pogs with me. Instead of having to deal with a variety of coins on base, the coalition of 66 countries who'd signed on to support the war in Afghanistan paid change in pogs, little cardboard poker-type chips that could be traded in for real money before going home. They took time to collect, but were useful for tea, ice cream, and other treats enjoyed in the short hours off duty. He had almost $80 worth, and I wanted that bag. I could be the queen of our salsa club social circle, buying everyone rounds of chai over our endless games of gin rummy. I regularly teased him to fork them over without any seriousness at all, and he regularly refused, a smile on his face. But that night was completely different. At some point, we began to argue, and I moved to the bed, wanting to be physical, wanting to be held one last time. I'd taken his shirt off and he'd put it back on, but he looped his arms around me anyway. We were fighting, but also making out. When he pinned my wrists, I thought it was a joke. When he began to move on top of me, I didn't get upset. Wasn't this what I wanted? When he began to tear up my clothes, I helped him take them off. But when he turned me over and held me down, face pressed hard to the pillow, and began to do things to me that I'd never given him permission to do, I opened my eyes and my gaze was drawn to my boots on the floor. My combat boots. My one thing made for women, meant to stay on base, but which had already been out on so many missions on the open sand. They had already faced what the men thought was danger. And there they were, laced, unlaced, and haphazardly tossed into the corner. I stared at the way the laces pooled on one side, one boot standing straight up and the other tipped over, leaning on its buddy. I realized I didn't have a buddy, didn't have anyone I'd be able to tell, anyone I could lean on. I thought that person had been him. The same man on top of me, holding me down as I tried to struggle. There they were, the evidence of my crime. The only thing any investigation might care about. I had taken my boots off. I had sat on his bed. I had wanted him to touch me. Nobody would ever believe that I was being raped by a man I had been trying to sleep with. And nobody would care. So, like I'd been trained in my youth, I stopped fighting. I knew there was no point. I stared at the boots until they began to blur in my vision. I stared and stared until he was done. And then I sat up calmly and put my clothes back on. Somehow, I still had a voice. I asked him why he hadn't asked me. I asked why he'd forced me. I asked him why he didn't stop when I told him to. I don't know, I don't know, I don't know, he repeated again and again, his hands covering his face. He got dressed as I put my boots on. Hole by hole, I laced them back up, the evidence that I'd deserved it. I'd been telling myself for years that if it ever happened again, I'd be fierce. I'd fight, and I'd certainly report it. I wouldn't be like that 14-year-old girl who'd lain there and taken it, certain that it was her fault. I was protected now. I was somebody. I existed. But I didn't report it, and I couldn't. I'd been breaking the rules. I'd gone with him on purpose. I'd taken off my boots intentionally. I knew nobody would care that I'd been raped. I knew no one would believe me. If I walked out of his room and reported him, it would end my career forever. He picked up his keys, and I picked up my assault rifle. And we walked to his truck in silence. I noted the ultimate irony of this assault, that I'd been armed, while he had not. He drove me to my room, and before I could open the door, he tossed something in my lap, the bag of Pogs. $83.57. I would count later, over and over again. He hugged me and told me to keep my chin up. Then he drove away, and I never saw him again. I felt the blood pulse in my body and heard it in my ears, along with Captain Madison's warning. You'll probably get raped while we're here. Now that it had happened, maybe my constant fear, always waiting for the attack, would subside, I thought. But the words continued to echo in my head. Watch your back. Don't get raped. Don't get yourself raped. You can get signed copies of Uncultured attached here, or listen to me read it to you anywhere you get your audiobooks.